To construct the perpendicular bisector of a segment, I need to find two different points that are equidistant from the endpoints of the original segment. To find the perpendicular bisector of AB, I'm going to put my compass point on one endpoint, and I am going to open it more than half the length of the segment. There's no specific amount, it just has to be more than halfway. I'm going to make an arc that extends both above and below the line segment. Being very careful to keep my compass setting exactly the same, I'll move my compass point to the other endpoint of the line segment and make an arc. It's very important that I have 2 points of intersection because that's what determines a line. If I only have 1 point that I have to go through, there are infinite lines that could go through that 1 point. If I have 2 points of intersection, there's only 1 line that I can possibly draw. So when I connect those two, I get a nice perpendicular bisector, so I know that that's a right angle, and I also know that it splits that line segment directly in half. Sometimes we'll have a line segment like CD, where there's not enough space on both sides of the line segment to make intersections. So we're going to make our second intersection point a little bit differently. The first step looks very similar. I'm just going to make sure that my compass setting is more than half the length of the line segment. So that should work. And I'll make an arc from one end point, switch my compass point to point C, again being very careful that I've kept the same compass setting. So there's one intersection. But that's not enough. There are infinite lines I could draw that go through that 1 point, so I need one other intersection point that's on my perpendicular bisector. So I'm going to change my compass setting. It still has to be more than half the length of the line segment, but a different setting than I used the first time. And then I'll come to point C and make a second arc. That way, I still have 2 points that are equidistant from C and D to connect and make the perpendicular bisector of my line segment. So I know that's a right angle, and I know that that is the midpoint of CD. There are a few things having to do with triangles that we can construct once we know how to make a midpoint, which our perpendicular bisector does give us. So my first triangle, I am going to construct a median. A median is a line segment that starts at one vertex of a triangle, doesn't matter which one, and it goes to the midpoint of the opposite side. So I'm going to label this point X, and I want to make the median that starts at point X. So my first step is to find the midpoint of the side opposite of X. And now that I know how to construct a perpendicular bisector, I can find the midpoint of that segment. So I'll start with my compass point on one endpoint of the triangle, of that side of the triangle. Make sure that my compass setting is more than half the length of that side, and I'll make an arc. Be very careful to keep my same compass setting, go to the other endpoint of that side, make another arc that intersects twice. And what I'm really interested in is where this perpendicular bisector intersects the side of the triangle, because that will be my midpoint. So I'm going to line this up carefully, make sure I'm going through both of my intersection points. And now that I know where that point is, we'll call that A. That's the midpoint of that side of the triangle. So I'm going to use my straight edge to connect point X with point A. XA is a median of that triangle. Another thing we can find in a triangle that has to do with midpoints is a midsegment of a triangle. A midsegment of a triangle connects the midpoints of 2 sides of the triangle. So I'm just going to pick 2 sides to find my midpoints. I'm going to start with this side. And again, the perpendicular bisector is how we find a midpoint. Looks like my compass is already more than half the length of that side. So I'll make an arc, switch my compass point to the other end point of that side, make another arc. And again, I'm really concerned with where that perpendicular bisector intersects the sides because that will be my midpoint. So I'll connect my two intersection points. That point where they intersect is the midpoint of that side. I'm just going to label it M. And now I need to make a midpoint of another side so I can connect to make the midsegment. So I'll put my compass point on one end point. I don't need it to be open quite that far, so I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller. It's still more than half the length of that side. Bring my compass point to the other end point of that side and make an arc. I've got my two intersection points. So now I can connect those to find the midpoint of the side. I'm going to label that midpoint N. Now that I have two midpoints, I can connect them to make the mid-segment of the triangle. So segment MN is a mid-segment of that triangle.